The heavy steel door of Marcus Taylor's studio creaked open, letting in a sliver of golden afternoon light. The room was alive with color, canvases stacked against every wall, splashes of paint across the concrete floor, and half-finished masterpieces scattered about. Marcus wiped his hands on his worn, paint-splattered jeans and sighed. He had been working for hours, consumed by his latest piece, but today he needed inspiration from the outside world. His fingers ached to touch new textures, his eyes craved the brushstrokes of other artists, and his mind sought clarity amidst the chaos of his thoughts. The world outside his studio was a far cry from the vibrant, creative haven he had built for himself. Marcus lived in a modest neighborhood that bore the scars of neglect and disinvestment. Despite its struggles, it was home, a place where his roots were deep, and his art had taken shape. But today, he ventured into a different realm entirely. He dressed in his usual attire, a simple black hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. His only accessory was the small leather satchel he carried everywhere, containing his sketchpad, charcoal, and a few tubes of paint, his tools of expression. As Marcus stepped onto the bustling streets of the city's wealthy district, he was immediately struck by the stark contrast. The air felt different here, crisper, colder, almost detached. The sidewalks were lined with boutique shops, high-end cafes, and galleries with polished glass windows displaying works that screamed wealth and exclusivity. He glanced at his reflection in one of the windows, adjusting his hoodie self-consciously. He wasn't here to fit in, he was here to observe, to learn, and to challenge himself. Marcus's destination was Beaumont Gallery, one of the most prestigious art spaces in the city. Its reputation for showcasing the works of celebrated artists drew collectors and critics from all over the world. Marcus had always been curious about the gallery, though he had never dared to step inside. Today, he decided to change that. As he approached the imposing glass doors, he paused, drawing in a steadying breath. The sleek, minimalist design of the gallery's facade exuded an intimidating aura. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. The interior of the gallery was cavernous and immaculate. The white walls were adorned with large, dramatic pieces, each illuminated by soft, strategically placed lighting. The faint scent of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of expensive cologne. Marcus let his eyes roam over the artwork, admiring the techniques, the layers, and the stories they told. He felt a familiar rush of excitement, the spark of inspiration igniting within him. However, his reverie was short-lived. "Excuse me, can I help you?" A sharp voice cut through the air. Marcus turned to see a man approaching him. Dressed in a tailored suit and shiny leather shoes, the man radiated an air of superiority. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled, and his expression was one of barely concealed disdain. This was Richard Beaumont, the gallery's owner, a man whose name carried weight in the art world but whose personality was as cold and unyielding as the marble floors beneath their feet. "I'm just looking," Marcus said, his voice calm but polite. Richard's eyes scanned Marcus from head to toe, lingering on his hoodie and worn sneakers. His lips curled into a faint smirk, as if he found Marcus's presence amusing. "Just looking, huh?" he repeated, his tone dripping with condescension. "Well, this isn't exactly the kind of place for casual browsing. The artwork here is exclusive." Marcus bristled at the implication but chose to ignore it. He moved toward a striking abstract piece that dominated one of the walls, its bold colors and intricate textures drawing him in. He leaned in closer, studying the brushwork and trying to decipher the artist's intent. "Careful," Richard said, his voice sharper now. "That piece is worth more than, well, let's just say it's not something you'd want to get too close to." Marcus straightened and turned to face Richard. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "Do you know the story behind it?" Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by the question. "Of course, I do. This is a piece by Julien Moreau, one of the most sought-after artists in Europe. His work has been featured in the finest galleries across Paris and London. This particular piece is valued at over $2 million. $2 million, Marcus repeated, letting the number sink in. He wasn't fazed by the price, he was more intrigued by the way art could command such value. That's incredible. Richard chuckled, a cold, dismissive sound. Incredible indeed. It's the kind of art that attracts serious collectors. Not, well, he trailed off, letting his gaze linger on Marcus's clothes, his tone making the rest of the sentence unnecessary. Marcus felt a flush of heat rise to his cheeks. He had encountered people like Richard before, people who judged others by their appearances, who assumed that worth and talent were tied to wealth and status. He wanted to challenge Richard, to prove that art transcends such superficial boundaries, but he knew it wasn't the time or place. Instead, he asked, "What about that one?" He pointed to another painting, a smaller piece tucked into a corner. Its muted tones and subtle details spoke to Marcus in a way that the larger, more ostentatious works didn't. Richard followed his gaze and sighed, as if Marcus's interest in the less prominent piece was yet another indication of his ignorance. That's an older piece by an artist who's, well, let's just say they haven't quite made it. It's not exactly the centerpiece of the collection. I like it, Marcus said, his voice firm. There's something honest about it. Richard's laugh was louder this time, drawing the attention of a few other visitors. Honest? That's one way to put it. But let's be real, it's not the kind of art that changes the world or makes headlines. It's just filler. Marcus clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He had spent his life pouring his heart into his work, facing rejection after rejection, and battling the very biases that Richard so casually embodied. He knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be seen as less than, simply because he didn't fit the mold of what people expected from an artist. Well, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface, art has a way of surprising people. Richard tilted his head, his smirk returning. Does it now? Marcus nodded. Sometimes the pieces that seem small, unassuming, or filler, as you put it, have a way of speaking to people in ways that the big, flashy ones can't. Art doesn't have to scream to be heard. Richard's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered. That's a nice sentiment, he said dismissively. But in this world, it's the big names and big prices that matter. If you're not in that league, you're just playing pretend. The words stung, but Marcus refused to let them break him. He took one last look around the gallery, his gaze lingering on the pieces that had sparked his curiosity and the ones that had disappointed him. He turned to Richard and met his eyes, his own filled with quiet determination. Thanks for your time, Marcus said. I'll let my work do the talking. And with that, he walked out of the gallery, leaving Richard standing there with a look of bemused indifference. Marcus's heart was heavy, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He knew his art was his voice, his weapon, and his legacy. And one day, the world, Richard included, would hear it loud and clear. Marcus Taylor's life had been anything but easy, but every trial had shaped him into the artist he was today. Born and raised in the heart of one of the city's most neglected neighborhoods, Marcus grew up surrounded by the weight of systemic inequality. The crumbling buildings and graffiti-covered walls were the backdrop of his childhood, but within that urban decay, he found beauty. His mother, a single parent who worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table, often said, "Find your light, Marcus, even in the shadows." Marcus discovered that light when he was 8 years old. One rainy afternoon, trapped inside his small apartment, he found an old box of crayons, tucked away in a closet. The moment he put crayon to paper, the gray world around him began to transform. His first drawings were simple, stick figures, messy rainbows, and shaky houses, but they held something special, a rawness, a soul. His art became his escape. When the world outside felt too harsh, Marcus poured his feelings onto paper, cardboard, or any surface he could find. His early inspirations were the murals in his neighborhood. Vivid depictions of struggle, hope, and resistance, painted by local artists who were trying to reclaim their streets. He watched them work, mesmerized by how they turned bare walls into vibrant expressions of identity. However, pursuing art was far from straightforward. In school, Marcus faced relentless bullying for his quiet demeanor and passion for drawing. He was often called names and ridiculed for his dreams of becoming an artist. "You'll never make it," they said. "Art doesn't pay the bills." Even his teachers, while sympathetic, urged him to consider more practical careers. And then, there was the racism, subtle at times, blatant at others. Whether it was being followed by store employees or being ignored when he tried to participate in community art programs, Marcus learned early on that he would have to fight twice as hard to be seen. He internalized the pain and frustration, channeling it into his work. Each stroke of his brush became a form of resistance, a statement that his voice mattered. His life changed when he met Grace Morgan, a renowned art critic and curator. Marcus was 16 when Grace stumbled upon one of his street sketches during a community art event. She had been walking by when a small crowd of onlookers caught her attention. In the center of the group was Marcus, crouched over a massive canvas, his hands flying as he painted a scene of children playing in a dilapidated park. The piece was raw yet hauntingly beautiful. Grace, with her sharp eye for talent, saw something extraordinary in Marcus. She approached him after the event, her elegant demeanor intimidating but her words warm. "You have a gift," she said. "Have you ever considered taking your art beyond these streets?" From that moment, Grace became Marcus's mentor. She introduced him to the world of galleries, exhibitions, and art collectors, a world that often felt foreign and unwelcoming to him. Grace, however, was unyielding in her belief in his talent. She connected him with resources, helped him refine his techniques, and encouraged him to embrace his unique voice. "Your art doesn't have to fit their mold," she told him. "You create your own." For years, Marcus worked in the shadows, honing his craft and selling his pieces anonymously online. The pseudonym he used, E. Taylor, was a tribute to his late mother, Elizabeth. Slowly but surely, his work began to gain traction. Celebrities and high-profile collectors purchased his pieces, drawn to the raw emotion and striking narratives they conveyed. Yet, Marcus remained reclusive, hesitant to step into the spotlight. He feared that revealing his identity might invite scrutiny or diminish the authenticity of his work. The humiliation he experienced at the Beaumont Gallery only fueled his fire. Returning to his studio that evening, Marcus was a man on a mission. He set up a blank canvas and let his emotions take over. The memory of Richard Beaumont's sneer, the dismissive tone, the judgmental stares. All of it flowed from his mind to his brush. He worked through the night, layering paint with deliberate intensity, creating a piece that captured the essence of defiance and resilience. By the time the sun rose, Marcus stood back and surveyed his work. The painting was bold and unapologetic, with sweeping strokes of deep reds and blacks, contrasted by bursts of gold and white. It told a story of struggle and triumph, pain and hope. It was a piece that demanded attention, just as Marcus intended to. Unbeknownst to the likes of Richard Beaumont, Marcus was already making waves in the art world. His name might have been hidden, but his work was impossible to ignore. And now, he was ready to step into the light. Marcus Taylor sat on a worn stool in the middle of his studio, his hands resting on the edges of his latest masterpiece. Sunlight filtered through the cracked windows, illuminating the layers of color and texture he had poured into the canvas over the past few weeks. His thoughts were heavy, replaying the encounter at Beaumont Gallery. That moment of humiliation had stayed with him, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had intensified his resolve. He was still lost in thought when the sound of the studio's bell jolted him. He turned to see Grace Morgan entering, her sharp silhouette framed by the sunlight. She carried herself with her usual confidence, her tailored gray coat and signature silk scarf adding an air of sophistication. But there was something else in her expression, a mix of excitement and determination. "Grace," Marcus greeted, standing and wiping his hands on his jeans. "I wasn't expecting you." Grace's eyes swept across the room, lingering on the finished and unfinished work scattered about. She finally settled her gaze on the new piece. "Marcus," she said, her voice a mix of awe and pride. "You've outdone yourself." He looked at the painting, the one he had created after his encounter with Richard Beaumont. It was bold and unapologetic, a storm of emotion captured in every stroke. Marcus shrugged. It's just another piece, he said, though he knew it was more than that. Grace stepped closer, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. Don't downplay it. This isn't just a painting, it's a statement. And the world needs to see it. Marcus frowned, unsure of where she was going. Grace, you know how I feel about. Enough hiding, she interrupted, her tone firm but kind. Your work has already started a movement, Marcus. Collectors are buzzing about E. Taylor, wondering who this enigmatic artist is. Your paintings are being discussed in circles you wouldn't believe. It's time for them to know your name. Marcus looked away, a mix of pride and fear swirling in his chest. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of attention, he admitted. What if they don't accept me? What if it all falls apart? Grace crossed her arms, giving him a look that was both maternal and unyielding. They'll accept you because your talent leaves them no choice. And even if they don't, you don't need their approval. You're already shaping the conversation, Marcus. Now, it's time to own it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black envelope, handing it to him. Marcus hesitated before taking it, his fingers brushing against the embossed lettering on the front. He opened it carefully, revealing an elegant invitation to an exclusive art exhibition hosted by a prominent collector, Evelyn Harrington. The event, titled Breaking Boundaries, The Art of Transformation, was designed to showcase revolutionary artists making waves in the industry. They want me? Marcus asked, disbelief evident in his voice. They want you, Grace confirmed. Evelyn has been following your work for months. She's one of the most respected collectors in the world, and she's offered to make you the centerpiece of her next exhibition. But there's a catch. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What's the catch? Grace smiled. She wants the real you. No pseudonyms, no anonymity. She wants Marcus Taylor. The weight of her words hung in the air. Marcus had spent years hiding behind the name E. Taylor, not out of shame, but as a form of protection. Revealing his identity meant opening himself up to scrutiny and judgment. But it also meant claiming his place in the world, a world that had often tried to shut him out. After a long pause, Marcus exhaled deeply. Okay, he said finally. I'll do it. Grace's face lit up with pride. I knew you would. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Evelyn Harrington herself visited Marcus's studio, her sharp eyes taking in his work with a mixture of admiration and approval. She selected 10 pieces for the exhibition, each one telling a story of resilience, identity, and transformation. Word of the event spread quickly, with influential buyers, critics, and media outlets clamoring for invitations. For Marcus, the anticipation was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. Grace helped him navigate the logistics, ensuring every detail was perfect. She also prepared him for the inevitable media attention, coaching him on how to handle interviews and public appearances. The night of the exhibition arrived faster than Marcus had expected. The venue, an opulent gallery in the heart of the city, was a stark contrast to the modest spaces Marcus was used to. As he stepped inside, dressed in a tailored suit Grace had insisted he wear, he felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. This was his moment, a culmination of years of struggle and perseverance. The gallery was buzzing with energy. The walls were adorned with his work, each piece meticulously lit to highlight its depth and emotion. Attendees whispered excitedly as they moved from one painting to the next, their faces reflecting a mix of awe and introspection. Among the crowd was Richard Beaumont. The gallery owner had received an invitation through Evelyn's connections, unaware of the featured artist's identity. He sipped his champagne and scanned the room, his sharp eyes searching for potential talent to scout. Richard had heard of E. Taylor and was eager to align himself with the rising star, seeing it as an opportunity to elevate his own gallery's reputation. As Richard moved from painting to painting, he couldn't hide his admiration. The pieces were extraordinary, each one a masterpiece in its own right. He leaned toward another gallery owner and whispered, "Whoever this E. Taylor is, they're destined for greatness. I might have to make an offer before someone else snatches them up." Unbeknownst to Richard, Marcus was watching from across the room, blending in with the crowd. He observed the gallery owner's reactions, with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. This was the same man who had dismissed him so easily, and now he was praising his work, without realizing it. As the evening progressed, Marcus felt his nerves begin to ease. The support and admiration from the attendees bolstered his confidence. He mingled quietly, listening to people discuss his work, their interpretations often surprising and delighting him. He realized that this was what he had always wanted, not fame, but connection. Toward the end of the evening, Evelyn took the stage to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice commanding the room's attention, "tonight we celebrate the extraordinary talent of an artist who has redefined what it means to create. His work is not only visually stunning, but also profoundly moving. It is my great honor to introduce you to the man behind the art, Marcus Taylor." The room erupted in applause as Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding. He glanced at Grace, who gave him an encouraging nod, and then at Richard, whose expression shifted from confusion to shock as recognition dawned. As Marcus stood before the crowd, he felt a sense of clarity. This was his moment, not to prove anything to Richard or anyone else, but to celebrate his journey and share his voice. With a deep breath, he began to speak. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady and filled with gratitude. "Art has always been my way of navigating the world, of expressing the things I couldn't say out loud. Tonight, I stand here not just as an artist, but as someone who believes in the power of creativity to transform lives. Thank you for seeing me, and for letting my work speak for itself." The applause was deafening, and as Marcus stepped down, he felt lighter than he had in years. Richard, meanwhile, stood frozen, his mind racing as he realized the gravity of his mistake. This was just the beginning. Marcus's journey had reached a turning point, and the art world would never be the same. The grand opening night of Breaking Boundaries, the art of transformation, buzzed with energy. The opulent venue, with its high ceilings and shimmering crystal chandeliers, was the epitome of sophistication. Every inch of the gallery had been meticulously prepared, from the soft ambient lighting that illuminated the art to the champagne glasses carried by waiters in crisp suits. It was a spectacle fit for a legend, and Marcus Taylor was its beating heart. Marcus stood near the back of the room, observing the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt more exhilarated than nervous. Dressed in a sleek black suit tailored to perfection, with a silk pocket square that added a subtle flair, he was nearly unrecognizable from the man who had walked into the Beaumont Gallery weeks before. He blended seamlessly with the affluent guests, most of whom were unaware that the artist they were celebrating was standing among them. The air was filled with murmurs of admiration as attendees moved from one masterpiece to the next. Marcus's paintings, arranged in a chronological journey, told a story of resilience, identity, and transformation. Each piece seemed to hold the audience captive, drawing them into its world. Critics scribbled notes, collectors whispered bids to Evelyn Harrington, and reporters angled for the best shots. Marcus watched as a group of admirers clustered around a painting he had poured his soul into, Phoenix Rising. The fiery reds and golds depicted a figure emerging from ashes, a metaphor for his own journey. Their expressions of awe filled him with pride. This was why he created art, to connect, to evoke, to inspire. As he moved subtly through the crowd, a familiar voice caught his attention. "Absolutely stunning, isn't it?" said Richard Beaumont, the owner of the gallery that had once dismissed Marcus as a nobody. Richard stood beside another gallery owner, gesturing toward Marcus's work. "I have to admit," Richard continued, "this Taylor has real potential. Their work is visceral, emotive, and exactly what the art world needs right now. I'm thinking of reaching out to represent them." Marcus stifled a laugh at the irony. He stepped closer, pretending to inspect a painting nearby, curious to hear more of Richard's thoughts. The other gallery owner, a woman with a sharp bob and an equally sharp wit, nodded. "It's extraordinary. Have you met the artist?" Richard shook his head. "Not yet. But I hear they're attending tonight. Whoever they are, I imagine they've had the kind of training that only the best schools can offer." It's obvious they're deeply immersed in the fine art tradition. Marcus smirked, knowing how far that assumption was from the truth. He was tempted to reveal himself right then and there, but decided against it. He wanted to wait for the perfect moment. Later in the evening, Marcus overheard Richard again, this time speaking to a journalist. "I've been in the business long enough to recognize real talent," he said, his tone self-assured. "It's rare to find someone with this level of skill and vision. Whoever E. Taylor is, they're clearly not just some hobbyist or street artist." The words stung, even though Marcus knew better than to take them personally. Richard's elitism was a reminder of the obstacles Marcus had faced his entire life. Yet, instead of anger, Marcus felt a growing sense of triumph. Tonight, he would show Richard, and everyone else, that greatness couldn't be confined by prejudice or assumptions. As the night wore on, Evelyn Harrington took to the stage, her commanding presence drawing the room's attention. She tapped a glass with a spoon, the chime silencing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice rich with emotion, "tonight, we gather to celebrate not just art, but transformation. The artist we honor tonight has redefined what it means to create, drawing from life's deepest struggles to craft works of profound beauty and meaning." The audience applauded, their anticipation palpable. Evelyn continued, "It is my absolute pleasure to introduce the visionary behind these incredible works. Please join me in welcoming the artist, Marcus Taylor." A hush fell over the room as Marcus stepped forward. For a moment, it felt as though time had slowed. He could feel every gaze fixed on him, every whisper of disbelief rippling through the crowd. Richard, standing near the stage, froze. His eyes widened as recognition dawned, his confident demeanor replaced by shock. Marcus reached the podium, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Thank you, Evelyn," he began. "And thank you all for being here tonight. Art has always been my sanctuary, my voice, and my way of navigating a world that hasn't always been kind. Tonight, I stand here not just as an artist, but as a testament to the power of perseverance and self-belief." He paused, scanning the crowd. "When I started this journey, I faced countless barriers, some external, some internal. I was told I didn't belong, that my work wasn't good enough, that people like me didn't have a place in spaces like this. But I didn't let that stop me. I poured those experiences into my art, and tonight, I see the fruits of that labor reflected in all of you. Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me, and for allowing my art to speak." The room erupted into applause, the sound echoing off the walls. Marcus stepped down from the stage, his heart light despite the intensity of the moment. As he made his way back into the crowd, people swarmed him with congratulations, questions, and requests for autographs. Richard, however, hung back, his face pale and his expression unreadable. When he finally approached Marcus, it was with a hesitant, almost sheepish air. "Marcus," he began, his voice strained. I didn't realize." Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. "No need to explain, Richard. I think my work has said everything that needs to be said." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but found no words. For once, his sharp tongue failed him. He nodded stiffly and melted back into the crowd, his aura of confidence replaced by quiet humiliation. As the night drew to a close, Marcus stood by the gallery's grand windows, gazing out at the city lights. Grace joined him, her smile warm and proud. "You did it," she said softly. Marcus nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "We did it." The night wasn't just a victory for Marcus, it was a victory for every artist who had been overlooked, every voice that had been silenced, and every dream that had been dismissed. And as Marcus stood there, surrounded by his work and the people who finally saw him for who he was, he knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the exhibition, Marcus Taylor awoke to a flood of messages and calls. His phone buzzed incessantly, collectors, journalists, and fellow artists all clamored to connect with him. The success of breaking boundaries had cemented his place in the art world, but Marcus wasn't basking in the glow of fame. Instead, he sat at his studio desk, pen in hand, jotting down notes about the next phase of his journey. The exhibition had been more than just a personal triumph. It had sparked conversations about the barriers faced by artists from underrepresented communities. Social media was ablaze with posts celebrating Marcus's story, how he had risen from a neglected neighborhood to become one of the most talked about artists of his generation. His work, with its raw emotion and unapologetic commentary, had resonated with people far beyond the art world. But Marcus knew this wasn't just about him. His success was a platform, and he intended to use it to uplift others who had been overlooked, dismissed, or marginalized. He began by organizing a series of community art workshops in the neighborhood where he had grown up. Partnering with local schools and nonprofits, he created safe spaces for young artists to explore their creativity, offering them the mentorship and resources he had once lacked. The apology. One afternoon, as Marcus was wrapping up a session with a group of aspiring teenage painters, his assistant approached him with a hesitant expression. "Marcus," she said, "you have a visitor. He insisted on speaking with you." Marcus frowned slightly but nodded. He stepped out into the gallery's reception area to find Richard Beaumont waiting. The once confident gallery owner looked out of place, his tailored suit slightly wrinkled, and his posture less assured. "Marcus," Richard began, his voice subdued, "thank you for seeing me." Marcus folded his arms, his expression neutral. "What can I do for you, Richard?" Richard hesitated, then sighed. "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you, and I let my own biases get in the way. Your success has been nothing short of extraordinary, and I realize now how wrong I was." Marcus regarded him for a moment, his gaze steady. "I appreciate your words, but I'm not sure what you're hoping to achieve by coming here." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "I was hoping we could collaborate. I've been thinking about how to make my gallery more inclusive, and I believe your insight and perspective could be invaluable. Together, we could create something truly impactful." The offer hung in the air, but Marcus didn't need time to think. He shook his head, his voice firm but polite. "Richard, I've spent my life fighting to be seen, to have my work recognized on its own merits. Inclusivity isn't a trend or a marketing strategy, it's a fundamental value. If you're serious about making a change, you need to do that work yourself. I can't be your shortcut." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but stopped himself. He nodded slowly, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for your honesty." The silent deal. What Richard didn't know was that Marcus had been planning something far more transformative. Through an anonymous intermediary, Marcus had been negotiating the purchase of Beaumont Gallery. The gallery, once a symbol of exclusivity and elitism, would be reborn as a space dedicated to showcasing diverse voices and emerging talent. The deal was finalized quietly, and Richard was blindsided when he learned the identity of the new owner. By the time the papers were signed, Marcus had already assembled a team of curators, artists, and educators to help him reimagine the gallery's mission. Renamed the Phoenix Collective, the space was designed to amplify the voices of artists who had been ignored by the traditional art world. The inaugural exhibition at the Phoenix Collective was a celebration of diversity. It featured works from artists of all backgrounds, including those from underserved communities and those who had never had the opportunity to exhibit their work before. The event drew an even larger crowd than Marcus's debut, and the energy in the room was electric. For Marcus, this was the true measure of success, not just his personal achievements, but the impact he could have on others. As he walked through the gallery that night, watching young artists light up as their work was celebrated, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Richard's reckoning. Meanwhile, Richard's reputation had taken a significant hit. News of Marcus's initial experience at Beaumont Gallery had circulated, thanks to whispers in the art world and a few candid interviews Marcus had given. While Marcus never directly called out Richard, his story spoke volumes, and many interpreted it as a damning critique of elitism in the industry. Faced with dwindling business and a tarnished image, Richard was forced to confront the biases that had shaped his career. He began attending community forums and diversity panels, listening to the stories of artists he had once dismissed. It was a humbling experience, one that stripped away the veneer of arrogance he had worn for so long. Over time, Richard started to rebuild, not his gallery, but himself. He became an advocate for inclusivity in the arts, using his connections to create opportunities for underrepresented artists. It was a slow, often uncomfortable process, but one that marked the beginning of genuine transformation. A legacy of change. Months after the opening of the Phoenix Collective, Marcus stood in the gallery's main hall, gazing at a mural painted by a group of young artists he had mentored. The piece, titled Breaking Chains, was a vibrant explosion of color and symbolism, depicting figures rising above adversity to create a brighter future. Grace Morgan approached him, her ever-present scarf fluttering slightly in the breeze from the open doors. "You've built something incredible here, Marcus," she said, her voice filled with pride. Marcus smiled. "We built it, Grace. I couldn't have done this without you." Grace shook her head. "This was always in you. I just helped you see it." As they stood there, surrounded by the hum of voices and the glow of creativity, Marcus reflected on his journey. He thought of the boy sketching on scraps of paper in a cramped apartment, the young man dismissed by gatekeepers, and the artist who had turned pain into purpose. Every step had led him here, to a place where he could not only share his voice, but amplify the voices of others. For Marcus, the true victory wasn't in the millions his work was now worth or the accolades he had received. It was in knowing that he had turned his adversity into a legacy of change, a legacy that would inspire generations to come.